I don't really like video games anymore. I don't know what happened, but at some point I just kind of stopped playing them. Video games keep coming out, I keep seeing new trailers, and I just don't find them very exciting. But I think when you stop trying new things is when you die for the first time. So every year I go and I try to make a collection of games that I liked, and I compile them in the State of Gaming. So that's what we're doing again. There's only a few rules. I have to play the game for at least an hour. I can't have heard of the game before just finding it on Steam. And they also have to have come out in 2024. With that out of the way, we can start off with our first game. La Sombra is a very fun, jazzy, colorful stealth Metroidvania. I had a really good time dodging guards and being sneaky. The plot is that you're this lady who's trying to steal a tiara in this building. As you're trying to steal the tiara, another criminal syndicate shows up and starts messing everything up. There are collectibles, there's multiple endings depending on what you want to do. The bosses are a little simple and some of the puzzles can be a little unintuitive at times, but I had a great time playing La Sombra. Squeaky Squad is almost the perfect video game. It doesn't do anything groundbreaking or revolutionary. The platforming feels incredible. It's not mind-numbingly boring or pull your hair out difficult. The visuals look good, the levels are well made, and it's free. The only problem is that I ran into several game-breaking bugs during my time playing. And I think part of it is my fault for trying to go through the game too quickly, for not trying to confuse it, but by doing things too smoothly or too quickly, I basically end up confusing the code. So if you're a slower player, or if you're a patient man or woman or thing, I would highly recommend Squeaky Squad. Schism is a fast-paced bullet hell roguelike where the gimmick is that you have two phases. You have a red phase and a blue phase, and enemies, subsequently, do two types of damage, red damage or blue damage. You want to be the same color as the attack that's about to hit you, or you want to dodge it. If you're the same color, you don't take damage. And so that's basically it. Otherwise, it's pretty standard. There are different types of builds, different types of upgrades, shops. Visually, I love it. It's grungy in a way that I really like. I remember I did a run where I pretended to be a paladin. I spec'd into like tank and I was like getting all these kind of religious kind of occultist items and I had a good time. Schism was pretty sweet. Buzz is incredible. It's super simple. There's only two buttons, left and right, and the goal is just to reach the end of the level. The way that you change your vertical axis is by going inside of these like void blocks. As you complete each level, the levels obviously get more difficult, more complicated. There are more mechanics that slow you down or speed you up or change your trajectory. It is very frustrating at times, but kind of in an addictive way, in a way that makes you want to play more, not less. I found myself getting lost in this game. I would play it for hours and hours. Buzz is like $5 on Steam. Highly recommend it. If you're anything like me, you look at Archaeogem and immediately think that this is just a Celeste clone. And you're not necessarily wrong, but you're not right either. While the developers very obviously took a lot of inspiration from Celeste, the game is still actually very fun. I find that the differences are just different enough that it's actually very enjoyable. It's basically exactly the same, except instead of a dash, you have a whip. And so you have to whip certain flowers, or I guess power-ups, to unlock their powers. Whether that's getting a jump, whether that's swinging around, whether that's changing the environment. The levels are super vibrant and unique, and the game is actually kind of hard. Like, I actually found myself getting stuck on some areas. The secrets are rewarding, and the game actually has some pretty decent replayability. Although the game is very, very heavily inspired by Celeste, I still think the devs did something special here. ReRoad is an ambitious tower defense game that tries to combine aspects from roguelikes, Sanctum, and Balloons tower defense. There are different inventions that you can craft or get from boss drops in between waves that buff you or your turrets. One of the main gimmicks of the game is that you kind of make your own map, so you carve out a pathway for the enemies to go through. There are upgrades that you can apply to certain towers, and you can scale those upgrades or choose different upgrade trees depending on your preference. Now, on my first playthrough of the game, my only complaint was that the game was too slow and too easy. When I played the game a second time on a slightly harder difficulty, I realized that there was a fast forward button, and also I proceeded to never beat the game ever again. I tried different drones, different builds, all sorts of stuff. I couldn't figure it out. If you're someone who's into tower defense games and is looking for something a little new, a little shinier than what you usually got, I'd recommend ReRoad. Shred-Off is a neat arcade snowboarding style game, which already has very popular titans in the industry like SSX Tricky and 1080 Avalanche, and there are a couple goals. The first one is just to finish the level, to get there without dying. But not only that, you want to get there with the highest score, or you want to get there with the fastest time. And not to brag, but in the few hours that I played it, I'm #1 on the leaderboard on Truly Peak, and I have the fastest time on Sub-Zero Slaughter. So if anyone wants to beat my time or my score, game is free. Halver is a neat puzzle game where you play as a rectangle who can shoot bullets that half other blocks, and so the game throws you puzzles. They add mechanics as time goes on, really just a standard puzzle game that I really enjoyed. Visually, while it's a bit simple, I like the drawings that they have in the map as they kind of disappear and reappear when you interact with them or move over them. And the puzzles are a really solid difficulty, I think. Some of them, of course, are immediately obvious, but some of them you really kind of have to sit down and think about it. If you're someone who enjoys brain teasers, then I think Halver it might be the game for you. Kickbastards is a sweet-ass parkour game. It's kind of like if you combined Mirror's Edge with Neon White. It's maybe not as fluid or comprehensive as those games are. The game is still very much an indie game, but it's a lot of fun. There's a lot of movement mechanics like wall kicking, rolling, crouch jumping, or whatever it's called. There's a grapple hook. Like any other speed game, the game itself is actually pretty short, but you always feel the need to beat your friends' times or the devs' times or to get all the medals or something like that, get all the collectibles. The game is really fun and fluid. The story's a little bit childish, I guess, but it's not like a focus. The main focus is to go fast. But yeah, Kickbastards is pretty awesome. Into the Emberlands is a cute point-and-click exploration game where you play as a Lightbringer who's trying to rebuild his village. Darkness came and swept over his home and destroyed everything, and so your job is to collect resources and rescue lost villagers to rebuild. And at first the game is kind of boring. It's really slow and really easy, and you're just kind of doing a lot of back and forth. But as you level up your village, you have to go further and further away from safety. And it actually becomes kind of scary at one point, because you're basically sitting there in the middle of the woods, surrounded by darkness. You're almost lost if it wasn't for the compass in the top right. And you have to sit there and be like, wait a minute, do I have enough durability on my lantern to make it back? Because if your lantern ever hits to 0, you're considered lost, no matter how close to the village you are. And just like that, you lose all your progress. You lose everything in your inventory. You lose all the upgrades that you got. The game is in early access, so it's not completely done, but the things that I saw, I thought looked very promising. Hooked on Speed freaking rules. It's like all the best parts of Marble Madness with a grappling hook. It's a pure, unadulterated speed game. The only thing you want to do is beat the level as fast as possible. Initially, it just starts as getting from point A to point B, and then eventually you have to pick up or go through checkpoints, and then eventually there's time stops, eventually there's keys. It's awesome. It just feels good to nail a route, to sit there and go, what is the fastest way that I can get through this level? Planning it out, practicing, and executing. And in this case, because the game is so small, it's only like $3 and no one's ever heard of it, you can get a top 10 time in the world without even trying that hard. There are some levels where you can get a silver medal and you're like top 5 in the world. So Hooked on Speed, I really, really recommend. Plastomorphosis is a really enjoyable game if you're into kind of the Resident Evil Silent Hill type of game. It's structured and made with nostalgia in mind. Visually, you get the staticky VHS look. The cameras are kind of changing in that kind of way. They even offer like a tank movement mode, which is awful. I don't even know how people used to play games like that, but you know, I digress. The game isn't super scary. I might even go as far as to say it's not scary at all, and I'm a huge scaredy cat. Admittedly, I played it with the lights on and everything like that, so maybe if I was really immersed, it'd be super scary. Assuming you don't get stuck, there are times where you're just sitting there going back and forth, interacting with anything and everything that you can. But assuming you're not stuck, the game is pretty sweet. The combat is clunky, but in kind of an intentional way. Most of the puzzles or clues are pretty intuitive. And once you kind of get into a groove, once you realize what the game is all about, it really becomes an experience. Noodle Delivery is a game that is heavily inspired by Blade Runner. It even has a pretty decent Philip K. Dick reference in it. But gameplay-wise, it's basically just a more advanced, more polished version of the Paperboy game from 1985 for the Atari. Not to say that it's not fun, it is fun, it's even like pretty challenging, especially at later parts in the game, and very engaging. Plot-wise, you play as this guy who's poor and has to deliver noodles. He's basically an Uber driver, and you live in this like fictitious dystopian world where you have to work for like dirt cheap, and all your friends and neighbors are like either sex workers or drug addicts, and I'm starting to think that this may not be as fictitious as I think it is. I don't really know how to describe this game at all. It's sweet. I liked it. You play as this like Ned Flanders looking guy. He's like a cyber cop or something, where you go into the worlds of floppy disks and you have to clear out viruses or something. It's not really clear, but what is clear is that there's an overworld and you need to defeat enemies in the overworld to collect coins. You trade those coins for tokens. You use those tokens to go into arcade machines to clear out the arcade machines. Once you've cleared out all the arcade machines, you can come back. And the arcade machines have little mini games in them, whether it's parkour, whether it's a boss fight, and the arcade machines or the little mini games are very enjoyable. The overworld's very enjoyable. There's this kind of B-side gameplay that you can unlock where you play as a buzzsaw that's cutting off a shape to kind of purify another floppy disk. Very kind of strange game. A little odd. I've never really seen a game structured quite this way, at least not a story game. I was mostly drawn to it visually. I think visually it looks really awesome, it looks really cool, and I said, you know what? I love the way that this game looks so much, I'm gonna buy it, I'm gonna play it, and I had a good time playing it. So if it looks sweet, if you're into like 90s vaporwave, I guess, this might be the game for you. Jett Rider is a classic action side-scroller game. You play as this astronaut guy who can fly, and you can shoot guns, and you collect trash. That's all you do. You show up to a level, you pick up bits of trash, you recycle them, you move on to the next level. There are hidden little bosses or hidden mobs or little extra things that you can do to get a little extra money, to get upgrades a little bit faster, but nothing spectacular. I think just a super solid game. Soundtrack is pretty sweet. Visually, I think it's pretty sweet. Just a super consistent game. You know, it's not like a 10 out of 10 supermodel, but it's also not like some gross hog. Just a nice girl to take home for the holidays, you know? Someone you'd introduce to your mom.
Sentient Steel.
Sentient Steel is a game that's very similar to Rayman Origins. It's a 2D platforming game with pretty cool parkour aspects. You can interact with the environment in movement ways. You can run up walls, you can slide on wires or rails or whatever they're called. You have a dash. The game itself is pretty short. I think I beat it in about an hour and a half, but like any other speed game, the goal is not necessarily to beat the game, but to beat the levels perfectly. At the end of each level, there are kind of challenges that you can complete that give you a higher score, such as doing it damageless, doing it at a certain speed, clearing out all the enemies. The points or credits that you earn after each level you can use in shops to buy upgrades to make your character better. This in turn obviously helps you clear out levels faster, so it's a self-feeding replayability almost. My only complaint with the game, if I had to have one, is that certain mobs take so long to kill, and it really just puts a damper on the pacing, but otherwise I had a great time. I think the bosses are really cool. While visually it looks a little derpy, I do like the way that it looks. I thought the story was pretty decent, and it didn't feel like it dragged at all. It's also co-op. If you know you like Rayman, you'll probably like this. Freak Hunter is a game about hunting freaks. Jokes aside, when I booted up the game, I thought it was going to be just a classic boomer shooter, a real Doom type, but it actually ended up being not really that at all. It felt a lot more like those arcade games that you used to play like in between rounds of laser tag for your birthday, except the difference is you control the character, but the character kind of controls like shit. He moves in tiles. It's like almost turn-based, but the game is real time. All the enemies are moving real time. You're shooting real time, but you move and turn at an absolute pace. So one click on the D-pad or one click on the key moves you a tile. If you hit left or right, that turns you, and if you hit the bumpers, you can strafe, I guess. And even though the game feels very clunky. It doesn't feel like a detriment. It actually feels like it's an intended difficulty aspect of the game. The fact that it's difficult to control, the fact that it's difficult to maneuver, what makes the game so kind of charming in a way. In addition to the fact that the game is kind of scary. It's all dark and stuff and spooky and gloomy. When you're just like blitzing down a hallway and all of a sudden there's a freak in front of you, you know? You can't help but be a little bit spooked. As levels progress, you get more guns, there's more levels, there's more enemies. It's a real jolly time of a game. Aarik and the Ruined Kingdom is a gorgeous forced perspective puzzle game that I honestly have zero complaints about. You play as this kid, Aarik, who has to go and save his kingdom. He doesn't really know that his kingdom needs saving, but through a series of clues and puzzles that you solve, in addition to help from his estranged mother, you kind of learn about this world and this kingdom and how it's unraveling and how it needs your help. And the game isn't super flashy or fast-paced or anything like that. It's your pretty standard puzzle game that always stays fresh. It's always throwing new mechanics at you, and you'd think you'd get overwhelmed or that you'd be confused, and I find the game has a very natural sense of exploration, I guess. They don't tell you that a new mechanic is coming explicitly outside of finding gems that give you legitimate powers. After you've been given the powers, they really try to stretch and bend the rule set that they've given you. That, coupled with the ever-changing perspectives and, you know, messing with the terrain and messing with your ability to go certain places, I thought the game was awesome. Something that's really enjoyable, especially if you're someone who enjoys Fez or Captain Toad's Treasure Tracker. Ducks to Spare is a really difficult precision platformer game. The very first time I completed a level, it wasn't super difficult, but it was difficult enough. It was more effort than I thought the first level would be, until the end screen pulled up and it said that I got no medals. I barely got the egg collectible item. And basically it called me a noob. And the game only got harder because it wants you to not only complete the level, which is already difficult enough as it is, it wants you to complete the level quickly. And the game is surprisingly deep, but I had to stop playing after about an hour because I was getting so unbelievably tilted. Like, the plot was something along the lines of like, you're this Giga Chad duck who's like macking on the huzz, but then you get struck by lightning and so you're disabled now and you can't fly, and there's this weird like wizard gnome thing who's making you go through a series of challenges, and then at one point like God shows up and you have to find his car keys, and then you find God's car keys, but then Satan shows up and he drags you down to hell, and I was getting so frustrated, and it was like I knew I had so many more games left to play, and I'm like, if I let this game suck me into it, like, I will get sucked into it. I have to stop playing this game here. So if you have a couple of free afternoons where you just want to be angry, I think Ducks to Spare is the game for you. Thunder Ronin is a 2B pixel art boss rush game, and it wastes no time. There is no fat to this game at all. When you press start game, it shows you the tutorial, and then it says boom. Good luck. It took me about 3 hours to beat the first 5 bosses, half of which I spent on just this dark forest girl. I swear to God, she's awful. But every boss was sweet. The levels are super pretty. There's even this scene, it's kind of spoilers. Look at this, look at this. When your character walks into the moonlight, they get highlighted by the moon. Isn't that so fucking tough? But yeah, the game is awesome. Give it a try. GoobnBalloonsDX is a triumph. The game is incredible. The levels are fun. Visually, it's gorgeous. The music is incredible. But where the game really shines is its bosses.
Loading right hand. Loading left hand. Oh. We're about to have some fun.
Playing through it, you can just tell the game was made with so much thought and care and love, and it has so much soul, just the tiniest attention of detail. If there's any game that you should buy, it should be this one. Raw Metal, simply put, kicks ass. There's almost too much stuff going on to kind of compartmentalize it into a specific genre, but I guess the way I would describe it is a stealth fighting game. You start in a level, and after you complete the level, you go down the elevator to the next level. Within these levels, there are enemies that can recognize you, and if you catch them or they catch you, then you start fighting, and then the fighting game part starts. Also in these levels, there's armor and gear and gadgets that you can use. The game is difficult. It is not easy. I couldn't tell you how many times I fought the Forge boss. My god. But incredibly rewarding. When you hit combos or do unique moves, you build up points, you can parry, you can dodge, and it just feels so good when you nail a combo and you hit that finishing blow and you get that yellow background screen and it just goes, whoa. It's badass. Cursed Crew is like if you combined FTL, RimWorld, and Don't Starve into one game and made it pirates. You play as a captain who maintains a ship, a crew, and you go explore this frankly massive map, and you attack other ships, you trade at ports, you explore islands. Pretty much what you see is kind of what you get. It is early access right now, so more stuff to be added presumably. It is a little unstable. It does crash somewhat often. I would warn of that, but I do think Cursed Crew is something to keep your eyes on. SomnaBuster is a beautiful 2D platform action game. Think kind of like Sonic, but actually good. The game is frankly incredible. The story is actually funny. The platforming is fresh and inspired. I really had a great time playing. I was starting to get kind of frustrated towards the end, because the game kind of starts off pretty easy. You're just kind of breezing through, and then all of a sudden it's not as easy because the game is getting longer and it's, taking longer, or the game is going on longer, so the game is obviously getting harder, but you're still kind of trying to treat it with that same nonchalantness, and it doesn't work. But it was a great time. I had a great time. Phase Factory is a choose-your-own-adventure story turn-based deck building game. I don't really know how to describe Phase Factory. I do know you play as a factory overseer or manager for a sorcerer named Faye. The way sorcery works in this world is you take elements, you put them into machines and you spit them out. And the game is fun. The combat is enjoyable if you like turn-based stuff. I will say one thing I find really weird. It's not a bad thing, it's just kind of a different way to play. When you lose fights, the game doesn't reset you. It doesn't go, oh, you lost, time to go do it again until you win. You just lose. You just lose, and then the story continues. The story goes, ha, loser, and then it keeps going, and it's almost worse. It's dude, I don't want to be a loser. I want to be a winner. Why are you doing me like that? And you and then the game just keeps going, and you want to go back. You don't have a save. You're fuck, dude. And then you do it again and again and again, and you're dude, I would rather want to lose. I'd rather the NPCs are smirking at me in the dialogue. I feel like a dickhead. But yeah, Phase Factory is sweet. Noreya the Gold Project was a really fun Metroidvania. I thought the bosses were fantastic. I thought the levels were really pretty. I thought the mechanics were really fun. I thought the platforming was super solid. I've always been a really big fan of religious undertones or religious imagery, so this was kind of really right up my alley. You play as this hot-ass chick who got, owned, and you basically have to swear your allegiance or balance your allegiances between either the god of greed or the goddess of light, and you kind of watch the story unravel. And of course, nothing is ever as simple as it seems, and they have really fun mechanics. They introduce this concept of a shadow version of yourself. The Hollow Knight influence is very obvious, but I like Hollow Knight, so this was great. I thought this was awesome. Rogue Voltage is another weird deck building game, except this one is a roguelike. Every time you finish a run, you unlock more characters and you can unlock more possible upgrades. The way the combat works is that you get these blocks, let's call them, and these blocks, when powered by generators or any source of power, perform an action. And you have to wire the generators to the blocks, and so there are multiple ways to generate power, there are multiple actions, actions can generate power, and eventually you have this web, this cobweb of wires that performs your action, and that's what makes the game fun. It's kind of difficult to describe unless you're playing the game, but it was really fun. It is really sweet. It's kind of like Darkest Dungeon for people who are super into electricity. I did not want to like this game. It, like, between me and you, it kind of barely functioned. Like, the buttons were sometimes wrong, sometimes correct. There's no, like, options menu. There's barely a main menu. But the gameplay is undeniably awesome. Like, the platforming is really, really good. You play as this girl named Mochi, presumably, and the only moves you have are left and right, jump, and grapple hook if you're in the air, right? Which is the same button as jump. That's all you got. And you can do some cool ass stuff. It feels really good. And again, it's weirdly unoptimized. Like, the gameplay is incredible, but everything outside of it is very, like, weirdly barren. You don't really realize how much flair there is in AAA games when it comes to menuing or the things outside of the actual gameplay. This game just doesn't have it. And then at the end of the game, it says that it actually won an award in, like, Japan or something for the under 18 video game making category. And you're like, oh, a kid made this. Like, that makes a lot of sense. And then you're like, damn, a kid made this? It's not very long, so it's kind of difficult to justify the $20 price point. But if you're like a real true perfectionist speedrunner guy, like, this game rules. Absence of Light was like if Geometry Wars was a Metroidvania. The game is great. The map isn't very big, so you don't get lost or stuck in exploration. Really, where a bulk of the gameplay is just fighting the bosses. Like, sure, there is other stuff to do. You can, like, look around, you can explore the map a little bit, but again, the map's not that big. So most of the time you spend on the game is just gonna be fighting these bosses, doing these insane, like, bullet hell bosses. As you progress in the game, you unlock more weapons, which unlocks more things, but the game is fundamentally very simple, in a good way. And maybe if you don't like attacking, there is like this mini-game section that is impossibly difficult. This guy wants to test your prowess, and he puts you in a room and basically just says, hey, survive. And it's brutal. Trackline Express is a survival game where you keep track of a train. It's kind of just that simple. You play as a character who uses water as a resource, and he expends his water to collect other resources, be that wood, stone, iron, coal, whatever. And basically you're just trying to get from point A to point B. You're either playing campaign, where there's actually like a story, or you're playing quick mode, which I believe is just you trying to get or go as far as you can for as long as you can. The game is solid. The game is sweet. It's multiplayer. It gets pretty difficult pretty quickly, especially when you hit that desert zone. Like, the desert is just like real life, it's brutal. As you progress in the game, the train gets longer and longer and longer, and the game is obviously getting harder and harder and harder, and that's kind of, it's the meat and potatoes. But yeah, the game is pretty rad. You guys remember when I told you GoobnBalloons was the game to buy from this year's State of Gaming? I lied. Dude, and that's how the game starts. Like, obviously I spliced some stuff here and there to make it a little more exciting. Do you even need to see gameplay? I mean, come on. I love this game so much. It's a game that reminds you that video games are meant to be works of art. Even though the game is almost entirely black and white, it's still so vibrant. The little color that they do use just pops out of the screen. You know what I mean? It's so good. Just trust me on it. Just trust me, it's so good. And that's kind of it for this year's State of Gaming. The video did come out a little bit later than I wanted it to, just because I was trying to be too ambitious. I was trying to do too many games. The way that I do State of Gaming is I open up Steam. Hold on, I can show you. I open up Steam. I go to, let's just say, specials. Right, I get to this screen. I turn off special offers. I sort by release date. And then I turn on games. And then I just start scrolling. That's how I do State of Gaming, right? And what I tried to do is from January to December, every month I would check every single, I would scroll through literally every game that came out on Steam that month, and I would see if I liked it or not. So there were lots of games that I tried, I didn't like. There were lots of games that, I missed. There were lots of games that I really liked. And I urge you guys to do the same or something similar. I urge you guys to try and find, there's a lot of porn. Admittedly, there's a lot of porn. But, I urge you guys to try and find new things or to support kind of indie artists or indie game developers, because that's how you find people who are good at making games. That's how you encourage people to create art and stuff. So yeah, this project ended up being a little bit too ambitious. I didn't even make it to December, if I can be honest with you. I think I scrolled through every single game up until I think the beginning of October. So if you want to make your own State of Gaming or something cool, October to December you guys can have. But yeah, you can just, thousands of games, So yeah, thanks so much for watching. I'll smell you guys later. Bye, Zeus.